Okay, everybody, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to another App Dynamics webinar. The subject of this one is building your own custom extensions. Just a couple of ground rules first. Wanted to let you know that this webinar is being brought to you by our awesome community team. They also run the community website, the user groups, and the fan club. So after the webinar is over, if you're not familiar with those things, please head over to our website and check them out. They're great ways to get engaged with us, especially if you're building your own extensions and things like that. It's great to meet other people that are doing advanced things with App Dynamics. For most of the broadcast, we're going to be in what's called listen-only mode, which means everyone but me is muted. Sorry about that. If you have a question, you can use the GoToWebinar control panel. There's an option to raise a question. I'll see it in a chat window on my screen, and I'll try to answer it. So we're going to start off with some slides and some examples, and then about the last 30 to 40 minutes of the webinar will be an open Q&A. So if you have questions about the presentation, or if you've been trying to build extensions and you have questions, that's the perfect time to ask whatever is on your mind. Okay, so let's get started. So agenda, just a quick introduction to what are custom extensions. I'm going to take you through writing 3 different kinds of extensions, one using scripts, one using native Java, and then a third using an HTTP listener that's available in the machine agent. And then I'll show you what you can do with these metrics, and finally give you some best practices and advice that I've gotten from my time building extensions. And then, like I said, whatever time we have remaining after that, we'll have open office hours where you can ask your questions. Okay. Just so you know, the slides and the recording will be posted online after we're done, and also all the code that you see will be posted on GitHub, so if you want to check it out or even fork it and play with it, you can do all of that. So before I get started, just a quick introduction. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Todd Radell. I built up our technical account management team for App Dynamics over the last couple of years, and now I run a team called Customer Advocacy. But along the way, I've built a whole bunch of extensions for App Dynamics, and today I'm going to show you one that it's in progress and I'm working on it right now. But if you have questions after the broadcast, you see all my contact information up there. I encourage you to email me or get a hold of me anytime. I love talking to customers and answering questions, so don't be shy. Okay, so what is an extension and why do you want one? So real quick, extensions are plugins to the machine agent. If you come from the Java world, you're probably already aware of our machine agent. It's a separate agent that you install on your app server. And out of the box, it gathers data about CPU, memory, disk, network, those kinds of things. But it also has an extension mechanism where you can plug in additional monitors. And that's what I'm going to show you today. Okay, so it's a mechanism for getting additional metrics, additional data into App Dynamics. Now, if you come from the .NET world, the .NET agent has a limited machine agent built in that does the CPU, network, disk metrics, but doesn't have the extension feature. So it is okay to actually run the download and run the Java machine agent on a Windows box and use that if you plan to run extensions. I've done that with customers before. Otherwise, if you come from the Java or PHP or Node or Python worlds, you may already have the machine agent, and then this is just a plug-in to it. So why would you want extensions? I hear this a lot from customers. You know, they'll tell me, well, we have our own custom instrumentation we already built. We built this nice dashboard in HTML. Like, why would I redo all that in App Dynamics? So this slide attempts to answer that. There are a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're on this call, you're probably already spending a lot of time in AppDynamics, and it would be nice to bring that additional data in so that you're looking at it on one screen instead of flipping back and forth between tools. Also, once you bring those metrics into AppDynamics, they get baselined just like every other metric in the system. Okay, so you can set health rules and alerts on these custom metrics that come from your extensions, and send you alerts when a value deviates from normal or when it goes over a threshold. Okay, if you built your own dashboards, you probably don't have that capability. You can also create custom dashboards in AppDynamics, so you can create charts and things, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Once you have your extension, the data's there, you can add it to a dashboard. And then, like I said, going back to the first point, you know, if you're inundated with too many monitoring tools, it might be nice to eliminate a few and get that data into AppDynamics. I'm enough of a realist to realize that, you know, you're never going to get rid of all of your other tools, but it might be nice to eliminate a few and simplify the tool set a little bit. So if you have custom data in your application, you want to get it into AppDynamics, this is how you do it. Okay, some examples of extensions that are already built. I'll give you a link at the end, but if you weren't aware, on our community site, we already have well over 100, I think it's close to 150 extensions pre-built now for things like web servers, Apache Nginx, things like that, network infrastructure, you see F5, there's an SNMP trap integration, there's other things. And another popular category is message queues. So ActiveMQ, TIBCO, WebSphere MQ. Sometimes it's nice to be able to monitor things like how many messages are in the queue or how many producers and consumers are connected. Okay, these extensions are pre-built. You go to our community site, you download a zip file, you unzip it into the machine agent folder, restart the machine agent, and you're up and running. There's no cost to these. The machine agent itself consumes a license, but that's it. So I encourage you to play with as many extensions as you like. Once you write your own, if you want to contribute it back to the community, that's great. I'll show you how to do that at the end. We have a bunch of user submitted extensions also. Okay, so some examples of what you could do. The first one is very, very common. A lot of times there are metrics that you can't get from your application or that would be hard to get from the running code. So a lot of people have a SQL query that they've scripted to run every few minutes or once an hour and hit a database and count things like number of new customers for the day or total sales or number of signups, number of tickets sold, things like that. Well, you can run that script as part of an AppDynamics extension and then bring that data into AppDynamics and put it on a dashboard. Okay, or if your developers have built their own custom instrumentation in the code, today they might output that data as mbeans or to a log file or perfmon counters or any one of a bunch of different ways of exporting that data. You could hook that up to AppDynamics also. And again, another common use case is we don't want to have 17 different tools that we check when there's a problem. We're already looking at AppDynamics, so we'd like to bring the data in. Okay, so assuming you fit one of those use cases and you need to build an extension, so how do you do it? The first example I'm going to show you is building one through a script. Okay, and when I say a script, I mean basically any kind of scripting language. You can do Bash, Python, Perl, Ruby, pretty much anything that's capable of sending output to the console. You can write a script, plug it into the machine agent, and bring that data in. So a really simple extension only needs two files. It needs your script. You probably already have one, like in the case of the SQL query I mentioned. You probably have a shell script that runs a query and saves it to a log file, so it just needs a few changes to output the data in a format that AppDynamics can understand. And then you need a file called monitor.xml that you drop in the directory, and it just describes the extension, gives it a name, how often we're going to run it, and so on. So let me show you a quick example. Okay. So this is one I came up with to monitor the contents of the temp folder and give alerts if there are too many files in the temp folder. Some applications create temp files, and eventually you can fill the directory up or run out of disk space or things like that. So the idea is this is just a really simple example. Okay, so I'm going to flip over to a live demo for just a sec. So on my Mac, I have a machine agent installed. It's the latest version. And you can see you have all the normal folders, and then underneath that you have the monitors folder. So I've created a folder called File Count Monitor, and I have my simple shell script. Okay? And all this does is look at the number of files in the temp folder. It gets a count, and then it spits that out to the console in a format that AppDynamics can understand. And I'm going to break this down in a minute and explain. And it runs in a loop and sleeps, so that as the contents of the folder change, it keeps updating. So for example, just so you can see what this does outside of the machine agent, so if I just run it, it's going to sit in a loop and spit out this metric over and over. Okay, so now how do I plug this into the machine agent? Here's the monitor.xml for this. Okay, and you can see the beginning is just a description. What name am I giving it? What does it do? Those kinds of things. This is the part that actually runs the plugin, and you can see here there's an execution style that is either continuous or periodic. Okay, so periodic expects the script to exit, and it'll run it once every 60 seconds or whatever period you set. So if you have a script, that just prints a number and exits, then you would set this to periodic, set the interval to 60, and we'll run it once a minute. Okay. Since mine has a while loop and a sleep, I made this continuous. It'll only run the task once and just keeps parsing the output. So it's an executable, and there's the file name. Okay, and that's really it. If I plug this in and restart the machine agent now, it's going to run the script. So there's my script. Again, I have all of this in the slides so that you can go back and refer to it later. And here's the output that you saw from the script. Okay, so you have the metric name. Okay, it's kind of a path separated by pipe symbols instead of slashes. Okay, so the common convention is to put everything under a folder called custom metrics, and then the name of your extension, and then I'm creating a metric called count, and the current value is 29, and then you have these three entries that tell the agent how the data is going to be aggregated. If you spend time with AppDynamics, you know we aggregate our metrics in three different ways. So there's over time, there's over multiple nodes, and in the case of the machine agent, there's also an extra parameter called aggregator, where if you have multiple observations within a 1 minute window, what do we do with the multiple values? Do we sum them? Do we average them? Things like that. This is useful for values that change very quickly. Like, for example, with the machine agent, you probably know already, it'll tell you how busy your CPU is. Well, it samples that data every 2 seconds and then gives you an average over the 1 minute. So here I'm specifying that within the 1 minute window, I only want to use the most recent observation instead of an average or sum. When the data is rolled up over time, instead of doing an average or sum, I just want to use the most recent again. And finally, if you run this script on multiple nodes, I want to sum them together and give me the total number of temp files across all the nodes. Okay, if you only have one node, then the cluster rollup really doesn't matter because the average and sum are going to be the same. Okay, so what values you choose for aggregator, time rollup, and cluster rollup really depends on the type of metric you're collecting and what you want to do with it. If it's something like a total number of hits or total number of events, you probably want to do sum instead of average or observation. Okay, and I have a slide here that kind of summarizes this. So, you know, whether you want a sum of the metric, an average of the metric, and so on. This is all in our documentation too. I'll give you links at the end. But just to know that you have this kind of fine-grained control over how the metrics get rolled up over time. Okay, so this is the monitor XML you saw a minute ago. The two key things in here for a script, you have the execution style and you have your script file name. Now, if you're writing a kind of plugin that's machine specific or operating system specific, you do have the option here of specifying multiple types of files for different operating systems. And our own machine agent actually does that for the hardware monitor. Okay, so if you want to look at an example, out of the box, the machine agent comes with two hardware monitors. There's one that's native in Java, and there's one that uses shell scripts for platforms that don't have a JVM. And you can see we have versions written for lots of different operating systems, and then the monitor.xml directs the agent to use the correct one depending on the type of operating system. Okay, so that's a really simple script extension. Like I said, the example I gave you was in Bash, but I've also done them in Python. Other people have done them in Ruby. Pretty much any language that's capable of writing the standard out, you can build an extension in. Okay, so the other option is to write an extension in Java. The machine agent itself is written in Java. And since a lot of you are using our APM agent on a JVM, you might already be familiar with writing stuff in Java. So there is an API to write your own extensions in Java. Most of the ones that you'll find on our community site are written that way. Okay. And so here's the structure of what that looks like. At a basic level, it's pretty similar. You need your class file, or most commonly like a jar file, okay, that contains your Java code for the extension, any extra libraries that you need as part of it. You might have a configuration file for your extension. I encourage people to make them configurable rather than hard code stuff, so that it can be reused. And then again, you have the monitor.xml, and it just looks a little different. Okay, so at minimum, you really only need a single class. Now, depending on your extension, it might be more complicated than that, but the minimum is one single class that extends from a managed monitor in the API. Okay, and then there's one method in that class that you need to override. It's called execute. That's where you do your stuff and return results. And normally it's going to be executed once per minute. Okay. So you collect your data, you make your HTTP calls to gather data or run your SQL query, whatever you need to do. And then at the end of it, you call get metric writer and print metric, and that'll send the data back to AppDynamics. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example that I'm actually currently working on behalf of a customer. It'll be published to the community when it's done. It's a new extension to collect data from the collectd daemon. This is a pretty popular system now that runs on Linux and almost every other operating system. Also has a plug-in type of architecture, so you can collect data from lots of different things. So what I've done is implement a collectd daemon in Linux, or in Java, that takes the data and reformats it and sends it to AppDynamics. So now if you've got collectd already running, you can take all of that data and push it into AppDynamics. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay. Sorry, I get rid of the warning message there. So this is the main class of my extension, and you can see it extends a managed monitor, just like I said. I also pull in a couple of helper methods that I can use for things like configuration. So here's my main class. It's really simple. Okay, I'm using log4j to keep tabs on what I'm doing. Okay, and then here I have a map of the metric data that I'm going to publish. Okay, so there's a background thread that starts up, listens for connections from collectd. As those connections come in, it takes the data, puts it into this map, this concurrent map. Okay, that all happens in the background thread, and then the main thread, whenever it gets called by the agent, it dumps everything from that map out into the machine agent. Okay, so there's really only two methods in the main class. There's a configuration method, okay, and then there's execute. So if you remember the monitor XML a few minutes ago, there's a section in there called task arguments, and those are parameters that you can send in to your extension. Okay, in the case of Java, these come in as the first argument. Okay, so this configuration method up here, I pass in the args, and really the only argument it's expecting is the path to another config file where I do the actual config. Okay, so here's what that monitor XML looks like. And there's the task argument that has the config file. And then in here, I try to go get the config file. And once I have that, right now this is a really simple configuration. Most of the other extensions have much more detailed config, but this is all the configuration I need right now. So this parses that and sets up the environment. And then here's the main execute method. Okay. This is going to get called by the machine agent once per minute again, like I said. So it starts off by forking off that thread to sit and listen for data from collectd, and then whatever's in that metric data map. Okay, so here's that main method I talked about earlier. It's going to call get metric writer and print metric. Okay, and that's it. That's all it takes to write an extension in Java. It's really a lot simpler than people think. Okay, and then I have some housekeeping methods here to shut things down when the machine agent stops and things like that, because there are background threads. Here's another thing that's often useful while you're testing, for example. You saw earlier with the shell script example that I ran it from the command line first just to make sure it worked, and then I plugged it into the machine agent. So you can do the same thing with Java, just add a main method, and that way you can try and run or debug the code, okay, and just observe the output. And then once you're ready, you can actually install it in the machine agent and restart the machine agent, bring it up, and see what happens. Okay? So that's really it. And then I have some other classes that do the background thread, but those are very specific to collectd. I'm not going to show you those right now. But that's it. This is your main loop. Okay, so again, I've got screenshots of the code and links to the code on GitHub, so you can come check this out later. All right, just as again as a reminder, as far as configuration goes, you can either do it through the monitor XML, it gets passed in as the first parameter, or if you have a lot of configuration, it might be easier to do it in a separate config file, and then just read in that file during the call to execute. Okay, a lot of our extensions do it with YAML files. You see the config.yml there. And there's a great library for Java called Snake YAML, where basically you just write a couple of simple Java classes, and then it expects your YAML file to have entries that correspond to those, and it's a kind of a no-mess way of reading in a configuration without having to, parse the text file and all of that stuff. So if you want to see how that's done, you can look at any of our extensions. They're all on GitHub. We share them under an open source license. So you can grab our code and look at it, reverse engineer it, adapt it to your own needs, whatever you want. Okay, so here's the monitor.xml for a Java extension. As you can see, it's got the same basic structure as the script extension. Just a couple of extra things in here. For Java, you have a class path. So if you need extra libraries and things like that, if you're connecting to a database, you might need the JDBC libraries, whatever you need. You can add them in here, and it'll add them to the class path when it calls your extension. Okay, so we have the class path, and then we have the actual class name of the implementing class. Okay, so in my case, it's collectd monitor is the name of the class. This is the class that's going to be run by the machine agent. And then under task arguments, you see we have the config file with the path to that YAML file. Okay. The only other difference is that this one is set to periodic instead of continuous. Again, I could have my execute task do a while loop and a sleep and change this to continuous. Either way, it really works. So I'm going to stop for a second. We have a couple of questions. One person said, can you write an extension in PowerShell? I believe the answer to that is yes. You would again need the Java machine agent itself to run the extension, but all it's really doing is opening a shell to run whatever command you tell it. I know it's been done with batch files. I'm pretty sure it's been done with PowerShell too. So can we build extensions as a replacement for additional machine agents? Not sure what you mean by that question. I guess you could build a machine agent extension to gather data from other hosts in lieu of installing machine agents on them, kind of like doing it with collectd, because collectd is already gathering CPU and network and things like that. I guess you could. Usually it's easier to just push a machine agent to those boxes, but I don't see why not. Another question, I think I heard we can have a machine agent for Windows OS. Yeah, the machine agent only requires Java. It'll run anywhere that you can install a JVM. So you can run it on Windows, Linux, AIX, Raspberry Pi, whatever you want. As long as you can have a JVM, you can run a machine agent on it. For machine agents, do we need to have controller on-premise or SaaS? Either one is fine. Okay, it's a plug-in to the machine agent. The machine agent talks to a controller somewhere. It doesn't matter if that controller is on-premise or in SaaS. Either way, you can send data to it. Okay, but yes, for extensions, yeah, you do need a machine agent to plug them into, and specifically, you need the Java machine agent, not the one that is built into the .NET agent. Okay, so just one last slide to show you how you install these things. You can see I already had the machine agent installed, so there's a folder called monitors. I go in there, unzip my machine agent, okay, and then this is the structure I get. I have my main jar, I have the monitor.xml, I might have a lib folder that's got all my extra libraries, and then I might have a conf folder where I've got my config, okay? Most of our extensions are actually built and packaged with Maven. So you see there's a pom.xml that describes the project, and so you can very easily build the whole thing just by running Maven package. And that should compile the code, build the jar in the zip file, and there you go. So I've got a jar file I could test from the command line, and then I've got the zip file that you could actually take and unzip into the machine agent and run it. Okay. The third option, the machine agent actually has an optional HTTP server or listener built into it. It's not enabled by default for security reasons, but it is something you can use for example, if you already have some existing instrumentation code and you don't have the source code or you don't have control over it, but maybe it's got a function built in where it can do an HTTP call, okay? Or maybe you've got instrumentation running on another machine and you'd like to be able to post it remotely to the machine agent. So instead of writing an extension code, you can enable the HTTP listener and then just make HTTP get or post calls to bring your custom metrics into AppDynamics. And that's really easy. Just a couple of command line options to enable the listener and specify a port number. You can also optionally specify an IP address to listen on if you want to restrict it to one interface for security reasons. This is all in the documentation, but in the simple case, I'm going to show you an example just using a standard listener on port 8000, okay? So you start up the machine agent with these extra parameters, and then you can use curl or whatever tools you have to push the data into the machine agent. There are two ways to do it. Just like we have three ways to write an extension, there's two ways to push data in with HTTP. This is kind of a legacy interface, but you can. The nice thing is you can do it all in a single command. Okay, so it's just a query string to the machine agent. So you do machine agent metrics, and then you pass in the name, the value, and the aggregation type. Okay, and you should just get back a 200 OK with no content. Okay. The other option is if you prefer a more modern API and you like to work with JSON data, there is a new kind of version 2 API, although it's tagged v1 for some reason, but you can post to API/v1/metrics and post your data as JSON data. You see here it's basically pushing the exact same metric, okay, but as JSON data. And then you get back an XML response. A code of 0 means that it was successful. Okay, so if you don't have the ability to write your own extensions or you want to push data remotely, this is another option some customers have used to push that data into AppDynamics. Okay, so let's say you've written your extension. Now you want to see, where do I find this data in AppDynamics? What can I do with it? Okay, so let me pull up my test controller here. Hopefully a lot of you know where to find the metric browser already, but so the custom metrics that you create, they're not going to show up on the standard dashboards, but they all come into the metric browser. Okay, and from there you can create dashboards and health rules and things like that. So if I come down to the metric browser, all of the machine agents live under application infrastructure. So if I go in there, here's my tier name. Okay, and then I have one node in the tier, and you notice under here I now have a folder called Custom Metrics. Okay, and under there I've got both of my new plugins. I've got my shell script plugin, the file count. I've got 7 files in my temp folder. I should go clean that up, but okay. And then from my Java plugin, you can see it's creating a whole hierarchy of metrics here. So for example, I can look at my Ethernet interface and look at bytes per second. Okay. So if you just want to look at the data, you can do it from metric browser. Most of you know already, but you can take data from here and export it as comma delimited, as PNG, as PDF. There's even a REST API. So once you push the data into AppDynamics, if you then want to get it back out with another script, there's actually a REST API, and we've covered that in past webinars. I encourage you to go online and you know, download and watch those if you want. But there's also a REST API where I can get the metric values from my custom metrics back out of AppDynamics as XML or JSON, okay? So this is great. I can look at it in the metric browser. Big deal. What else can I do? Well, I can build a custom dashboard. You can see I've built one here already that's using this data. So here you've got some charts. Here's the interface I was just looking at. Here's my loopback. And then down here, here's memory usage. I just threw in a pie chart for fun. Okay. So here's how you do this. So you add you add an empty graph. So here now I've got an empty graph in my dashboard, and then you have to add a new data series. Now, if you've ever created a custom dashboard, you probably know how to do this. And normally you have choices like overall app performance or BT performance or tier health, things like that. If you scroll all the way down, there's an option for custom metrics. Okay, so you select custom metrics, and then you click the button. And just like I did a minute ago in the metric browser, I'm going to drill down through application infrastructure, individual nodes, node 1, custom metrics. Here's my file count. Here's my collectD stuff. Okay, so I can take like system load or memory usage, something like that, and add that to a chart. So now I've got a custom dashboard using data that originated outside AppDynamics. Okay, and it really wasn't that hard. So I'm going to delete this to make my dashboard pretty again. Okay, so I can create a custom dashboard. Can I get alerts off of custom metric data? Of course you can. Remember I said earlier that every custom metric gets baselined and can be alerted just like all the built-in metrics. So for example, I could create a health rule. Let's say I want a health rule to alert me. If you think back to my use case for the temp space monitor, right? The shell script. I want to know if my temp directory is starting to fill up with too many files. Maybe it slows the system down. So I can, now that I've got that data in AppDynamics, I can create a health rule. So I'm going to create a health rule in my test app application. And I'm going to call it temp file monitor. And again, just like before, you scroll down and pick a custom type. This is an application performance rule because it's not tied to a particular BT. Okay. You could make it a node performance. And I could select my node 1. That'll work as well. The difference here is what happens when the rule gets violated. Okay, so you're used to probably seeing, for example, when you log into AppDynamics, you have the health of your application. If I drill down further, I can see the health of my app servers, right? So depending on how I create that health rule, if I make it bound to this node, if my health rule gets violated, if there's suddenly too many temp files, then the status of this node will change. If I bind it to the application and the health rule gets violated, then the application status is going to change. So it's up to you. Okay, in this case, I'm going to do it as a node rule. So again, temp file monitor, and oops, I selected the wrong type. Look at that. Okay, so I'll do custom. I'll do a node performance, and I'll select my node 1. There we go. And now you create your threshold. So I'm going to say if the value of my file count is greater than 1,000 files, then I'm calling that a critical condition. My warning condition, I'll copy from critical, and maybe I'll make that 500. Okay, so now if there's more than 500 temp files, I get a warning on the node. If there's more than 1,000, I get a critical on the node. Okay, there we go. And you can see it applies to node 1, and in a minute or two, the evaluation status should kick in and tell us if the status is green, yellow, or red. Okay. The reason it takes a minute because the controller evaluates all the health rules once a minute. So there's a timer that kicks off and it spins through all of these rules, so it may take a minute. Okay, but that's it. So now I've brought data into AppDynamics. I've created a dashboard on it. I've shown you how to get it through the REST API, get that data back out through the REST API, and I've built health rules that are going to give me alerts when those health rules get violated. Okay, and you could even go further, as you guys know, and do workflow things like, for example, if the number of temp files reaches a warning or critical level, maybe kick off a shell script on the box to clean out the temp folder. Okay, that's all very easily done with the machine agent and with what I already showed you. So you have another question. For health rules and alerting, any plans to add if this happens more than X times functionality to the product? So I haven't heard about anything like that in the next release, but that's a good idea for an enhancement. What I would suggest you do, whoever asked the question, JM, open a support ticket and ask for that feature. We'll get it on the backlog, and we'll try to get product management to add it to the product for you. I think that's a great idea. You know, the reason you want to do that is so that if you violate a health rule only once, you may not want an alert because you may have a blip or a false alert, something like that. If it's consistent, you know, you might want to wait until the third alert or something like that. Okay, so that's a really good idea. Okay, so this is just a review of what I showed you, how to find your custom metrics in the metric browser, how to create custom dashboards. Remember, you're just going to select the bottom option, which is custom, and then you drill down through the metric tree, starting with application infrastructure until you find the one that you want. One thing I should mention, once you create custom metrics, okay, you're going to find them actually in two places, at the node level and at the tier level, because again, it goes back to how we aggregate and roll up data, right? When you report metrics at a node, we automatically create an aggregated metric at the tier level. Okay, so like if I took my temp file monitor and installed it on 10 machine agents on 10 different boxes in my test tier, oops, let me go back. If I did that, then I would expect to have, I'm stalling here while I try to bring up the right screen. So under application infrastructure, under my test tier, I would expect to see 10 individual nodes, and each one of them would have file count under the custom metrics. You notice there's also custom metrics up here at the tier level, okay? And I've got my file count there. So based on the aggregation rules that I created, I would expect this to be the sum of all the file count metrics from all the nodes in that tier. And again, when you write your script and create the metric, you decide whether you want to use the sum or the average. Okay, that's where this comes into play. When I look at the tier level metric, am I going to see the sum or the average? Okay, but that's nice if you're gathering data from lots of systems. Just pay attention to where you are in the hierarchy and make sure you're looking at the correct one. If you want the tier level, if you want the node level, you have to come down under individual nodes. Okay, so use the metric browser to add them to a custom dashboard. You can see an example of what we did here. Or use the data to create health rules. And here's a sample screenshot from what we did earlier. Okay. Finally, just some kind of best practice advice, and then we'll open things up for office hours. But just some advice on how to write extensions. I'm not saying it's the correct way. Okay, just some general advice on things I've found to be useful. Rule number one, make it configurable. Okay, I know when you're testing with scripts, especially quick and dirty stuff, there's a tendency to just hard code things like IP addresses or paths or, God forbid, a username and password. But environments change over time, right? And it's much easier to make your extension configurable than it is to hard code the stuff. So that's one option. Either put the configuration directly into the monitor XML, or if you're happier with YAML files or INI files or XML, whatever you want, just have a configuration file and put your configuration in there. Option number two, allow a custom metric path. You saw earlier when I was creating metrics from the script, I specified the name as custom metrics pipe file monitor pipe count. And I said the convention is to put them under custom metrics. sometimes people want to be able to change the metric path. So don't hard code that either. Add a configuration variable where you can specify the metric path. The reason is people might want to run multiple copies of your extension pointed at different things. Like, for example, if you have one of those scripts that runs a database query once in a while, right? You might have one that's looking at a production database and one that's looking at test, or one that's looking at North America and one that's looking at Europe. You might want to have those under different metric paths, so allow the metric path to be customizable. Write portable code. Machine agents run anywhere Java runs or anywhere shell scripts run. So you want to be sure you're not using features that are only available in Linux, only available in Windows or whatever, because eventually that'll break in weird ways, right? If possible, use log4j. Send your output through log4j. That way it'll show up in the machine agent log, and you don't have a separate log file or stuff going to syslog or a database other places. Keep things consistent. The next two only really apply if you're planning to share your extension with the community, but most of our extensions have a standard structure that's built on Maven. So Mavenize your extension, post the code on GitHub. That way there's a sort of consistent structure to the extensions, and if people want to fork the extension and add functionality to it, they're not starting from scratch. Okay. One other best practice thing that you may run into, especially if you have an extension that creates a lot of metrics, there's a standard limit on the machine agent on the number of metrics it will be allowed to create. And in previous versions of the product, it was only 200 metrics. So that's basically just enough for the built-in machine agent metrics, the CPU, memory, and disk, and things like that. If you start installing extensions, some of them can create a lot of metrics. And in the documentation, you'll even see notes to that effect, like the F5 extension for load balancers, the TIBCO extension. Those create new metrics for every load balancer or every queue in TIBCO. So you could have hundreds or thousands of new metrics, and if the agent's only allowed to create 200, what you'll end up with is warnings in the agent log that say a metric limit was reached. And if you go to the controller, you might see your metric in the tree, but you might see no data. Okay, and that's the reason. So the fix is really simple. When you start up the machine agent, you include a parameter called max metrics. Okay, and you just bump the limit up. I've done 5,000, I've done 10,000. I've never seen a need to do more than that, but you just set it to whatever you want. And again, if you're running extensions, especially if you're running more than one extension, I would give the machine agent a little more memory. Okay, 256 is usually way more than generous enough. I don't think I've ever seen more than that. But if you start seeing out of memory exceptions, then just give it more memory. Okay. So finally, if you plan to share an extension with the community, which we absolutely encourage, step number one, make sure you remove any usernames and passwords from your code or from your config files or your test cases before you commit everything to GitHub. This is unfortunately a common mistake people make. I've even done it. And unfortunately, once it gets out on GitHub, then people have your password. Okay. We had an incident last year where we had to change passwords on some of our demo systems because there were extensions out there that actually had passwords in them that had been published to GitHub, and I was guilty of that too. So I'm not throwing stones. This is a reminder to myself as much as everyone else. Add a README. Document what your extension does, how to install it, how to configure it. By all means, include a license if you're planning to share it with people. Most of ours, I think, are under the Apache open source license. Obviously, the GNU license is fine too. Whatever you want, just include a license. Commit the code to GitHub, and then create a thread in our community site that says, hey, I published this new extension, come check it out, and have other people test it for you. Okay, so your README file, obviously you can put whatever you want in it. most of our extensions are done in Markdown format. That's the readme.md. Reason for that, number one, GitHub understands Markdown and can display it correctly. Markdown can also be converted to HTML, PDF, other formats. So it's a really simple format to work with. And this is all the stuff that we usually put in there, a description of the plugin, any requirements. Okay, so if there's extra libraries that need to be installed, if your script is written in Python, then you might want to say you need version 2.7 of Python, whatever it is, how to install it, where the configuration file is, what kind of metrics it produces. If you're going to solicit contributions or pull requests, tell people how to do that. Give them a link to your GitHub repo. History and release notes is always good too. Most of these things are frequently updated, so it's nice to know what was added in each release. And then, by all means, give people a nice fancy screenshot that shows them a custom dashboard or a screenshot of the metric browser that shows them what's possible. Okay. Finally, at the end here, I've just got some links. If you download the presentation later, I've got links to our documentation that goes over all of this stuff, how to build your extensions with Java and scripts, how to enable the HTTP listener. And then I also have links to some of our GitHub repos. You can use these as templates to create your own. The Apache extension and the URL monitoring extension were both made according to our best practices. So they have Mavenized build systems, they have README, they have license. They're structured kind of the way that we like to see them. So if you want to follow our method of doing it, check out the code for those two. And then finally, the two that I just showed you, I've actually put in GitHub too. So as I finish them and publish them, if you want to subscribe to the repo and watch what I'm doing, you can even give me your feedback and submit pull requests and fork it if you want. I always encourage people to share their code with me. Like I say, I steal from the best. Okay. So that's it. We're going to open up the floor for office hours and Q&A. I see we have a couple of extensions queued up already. Again, if you have a question that you want to ask, go into the GoToWebinar control panel, and there's a little icon that looks like a hand raised. Just click that and type in your question. So the first question from Mike McCart, is there a way to write an extension that can subscribe to a JMX event broker notification feed? The answer to that, Mike, is there's a way to write an extension for anything you can dream of or anything your heart desires. If you can write the Java code to subscribe to an event broker, then in that event loop, you could take the data and publish it into AppDynamics. Mostly I covered publishing metrics. You can also publish events. So when you're in AppDynamics, I think a lot of you hopefully are aware, but there's actually an event console, and that's funny, I can't find it right at the moment. Trying to do too many things at once, but there are events in there for things. Oh, there it is. They moved it on me in 4.1. Okay, so you have an event console that gives you things like JVM restart events or JVM crash events or application configuration changes, application deployments, things like that. You can also push your own custom events into AppDynamics. So you can do it right from the UI and register an event. You can do it with our REST API. You can also do it through an extension. So it should be easy to write some Java code to subscribe to an event broker, and as events come in, as the notifications come in, take that event and push it into AppDynamics as a custom event. Okay? Then you can use that in your dashboards, in the War Rooms feature, in other places in AppDynamics as kind of an event stream. So Shahid has a question. If you create an extension on one node, why do the metrics show up on all other nodes with zero data? Okay. So the reason for this goes back to the way that we do aggregation. So, the metrics that you're creating here are associated with one node in the tier, and then they get aggregated up to the tier. But in order for that to make sense, it has to assume the metrics exist at every node in the tier. So if I have 10 nodes and I install my extension on one node, those same metrics, that custom metrics folder is going to appear under every node. Okay, and actually not only is it going to appear at this tier, the test app tier, it's going to appear in every tier in the system. Okay, once you create a metric, it kind of bubbles up throughout the application and appears everywhere. It's just the places where it doesn't exist, you're not going to have data. There are ways around that are listed in the documentation. I didn't really cover them, but I think if you look, let me see if I can find the right page in the docs. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, maybe not. Okay, I've got the wrong page, but there is a way in the metric path, the metric name that you create, to tell the controller to only create those metrics on a specific tier or on a specific node. Okay, and basically you need the component ID of the node. Yeah, here it is. I scrolled right past it. Okay, so if I'm looking at like my e-commerce server tier, I click on that, and you see up here at the top in the URL, it says component equals 11. So now I know the component ID. Okay, and then I can create a metric path for my extension that uses that component ID. And so instead of doing custom metrics, pipe, file monitor, you could do server and the component ID, and they would only create the metrics under that tier. So if I use, next question from Stephen Brown, if I use the HTTP listener, can I hit a URL on a website to see if the site is up and answering? Maybe store the value of 0 or 1 to know if it is up or down, and then alert if it goes down. So I think the answer to this is no. The listener is a listen only. So what it's designed to do is to give you another way to push metrics into AppDynamics. But, Stephen, I'm going to make your day here because there's already an extension that does what you want, and I happen to know because I'm the author. So on our GitHub repo, there is a URL monitoring extension. And this is also on our community site, okay? But the URL monitor does exactly what you're looking for. You give it a config file with a bunch of sites to hit. Once a minute, it goes out and tests all of those sites. And you can see there's a lot of configuration options. And then it actually gives you back metrics that show you the response time to retrieve the page, but also the status that tells you if the site was up or down or generated an error. Okay, so this is what you're looking for, even. It'll give you a 4 if it was able to retrieve the URL. Anything less than a 4 is some kind of error. Okay, either the system was shutting down, that's canceled, the request failed, there was an HTTP error, like a 500 error, those kinds of things. So you can use this metric and create a health rule on it to say if the value of status is less than 4, then pop an alert. Okay, so this is already done for you. If you want to write a better one, please go ahead and share it with me. But I think this probably does what you want. Okay, so next question from Rushi, how to automate performance testing. Rushi, if you want to follow up and ask again, I'm not sure if you mean performance testing your application or performance testing an agent extension, but go ahead and clarify the question. I'll try to help you. Any other questions? Go ahead and type them in the chat window. Otherwise, we'll keep the line open for a while if anyone has questions. And again, while we're waiting, I just want to remind people that all of this will be shared on our community site. So you'll have a recording of the webinar. You'll have access to the slides. The slides have live links in them to the GitHub repo where you can check out the code for yourself. So what language do I recommend to start writing extensions? Question from Ram. What language I recommend is whatever language you're comfortable with. You know, a lot of people start with what they already know. Obviously, the native interface is in Java. So if you're a Java guy, go ahead and do it. But you know, if you can hack up a quick shell script or Python script or Perl, whatever you want, then you can do those too. There's a slight bit of performance hit on that because we have to fork off a new process to run it, but it's really negligible. So the answer is whatever language you like. Srinivasa wants to know, what is the community site URL? So I think the easiest way is to just go to community.appdynamics.com. And you can see here you've got an icon menu with links. So extensions is going to take you to the extension exchange, and you can see all of the existing ones that we have. We're up to 138 now. I think there's more that are being published all the time. So you can check these out. There's also the discussion forum, so if you want to ask questions about building extensions or share your extension with people, that's the place to do it. And then you've got the support link if you have problems running an extension and you need some help. One thing I should point out, when you're looking, let me go back to the extension exchange. So if you're looking at extensions, remember I said we accept user contributions as well. Okay, so when you click on one of the extensions, you're going to see all of the details and when it was last updated and so on, and then some of them are tagged as AppDynamics supported, and some are listed as community supported. Okay. If it's marked as AppDynamics supported, then it was developed by our extension team, by Kunal and his team or myself. Those are officially supported, meaning if you have a problem with them, you can actually open a support ticket. Our support team will help you get the extension running. If it's user submitted, then obviously we can't help you fix someone else's code, but if you come back to the extension and find who the author is, now Abby happens to work for us. This is a AppDynamics supported, but if it was a community supported extension, come back, find the author, and then ask them a question in the support or in the forum, okay, and ask for help that way. Anybody have other questions? I see a few people starting to drop off. I'll keep the line open for another minute or two if there are any more questions about extensions or how to write them or how to get started. John from UNC wants to know if I'm feeling okay. It sounds like I have a little sniffle. UNC cares. John, I really appreciate my son has a cold and I seem to have caught it. I guess it's the hazards of living in Pennsylvania in the wintertime, but I think I'll be okay. It's not Captain Trips or anything like that. Thank you very much. Any other questions other than my health? All right. If no one has other questions, I think we'll close out the webinar. Again, if you have questions or get stuck later and you need help with your extension, my contact information is at the beginning of the PowerPoint deck. Feel free to email me or tweet or reach out however you want, and I'm always happy to help customers out. Thanks a lot, Caitlin. You can go ahead and close the webinar.